So when it comes to budget gaming, how low of a budget can you get? Well, this PC right here is actually a $0. It's a completely free PC. $0, €0, zero whatever your currency is. This is completely made from donated parts from community members. Now, this isn't some video on how to cheat the system to get some free PC from some organization that gives out PCs or computers to, people who actually need it. This is something that you can do by yourself for your first PC build. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to do this. I'm going to show you how to collect all the parts. I'm going to show you benchmarks, games, and I'm going to show you the entire setup of this system. Let's get into it. Alright, first we're going to start off with the system specs. We have this pretty dinged up, pretty scratched up Antec case. It just holds everything together. It doesn't really matter that much. But for our power supply, we have this 80 plus Antec EarthWatts EA 500 with 500 watts max. So far it's been serving me well. Not too great because I had to go out and buy a cable for my GPU. It doesn't have an 8-pin PCIe cable. And then moving on to our motherboard, we have this 8-bit IP35-E. And then for our processor, we have the Q6600 with 4 cores and 4 threads clocked at 2.4 gigahertz. For our RAM, we have this Corsair XMS 2GB by 2 sticks of RAM DDR2 800. And then for our storage, we have this 160GB hard drive. And then the greatest part about this build, someone actually was nice enough to give me a free EVGA GeForce GTX 960 SSC. Alright, getting into the benchmarks, of course this is not going to be what every single computer is going to be like. Not everyone's going to have the same processor, not everyone's going to have the same graphics card, not everyone's going to have the same RAM, storage, motherboard, power supply, etc. So let's just go ahead and get into these benchmarks. According to userbenchmark.com, I ran some tests and for gaming it's at 25%, it's a raft. Desktop is at 25%, it's a surfboard. And then for a workstation it's at 15%, it's a tree trunk. So basically my computer is a worthless piece of junk. But it does say that the PC status is good. Alright, and then the processor is just rated fair with a relatively low single core score, blah blah blah. Finally, with a gaming score of 28.5%, the CPU stability for 3D gaming is poor. And then the graphics is 43.2 for GTX 960, which is not bad considering that we got that for free. Now, another benchmark that I really like is that Unigine Heaven benchmarks, and with tessellation at max and difficulty at extreme, we were able to average about 42 FPS, which is really good. I mean, considering that this is a $0 PC, 42 FPS on all extreme settings that you'd usually run with something that you have built yourself and a little bit higher end specs is still pretty good. So benchmarks are cool and all that, but really, how does this computer perform in games? That is the question we're here for, and the results are pretty surprising. Alright, so starting off with Overwatch, things are generally very good. Without recording, obviously it's going to take a little more usage to record, so I had to turn some of the settings down, but I was able to get around ultra or high settings. Something's off sometimes, but I was mostly able to get those higher settings. I think it was mainly the CPU that was actually bottlenecking it, because the GPU, I'm sure it can probably run higher stuff, and at times it just felt like the CPU was getting a little bit hot. I was monitoring temperatures, I was monitoring usage, and the CPU just always seemed to be pretty full. But overall, the game was very playable. I was playing at around 60 to 80 FPS, and overall, the experience was very smooth. As you can see here, things are pretty nice. And then over to Fortnite. So on Fortnite, I was able to run with everything off and view distance to far or epic sometimes at 60 FPS, 1920 by 1080. And this was a bit of a challenge, mainly because when I was recording, it would stop and lag in the middle of the game. But sometimes actually in game, when I was not recording, sometimes it would just freeze for a second and then come back. So that was a little bit annoying. I wish they would have a little bit more settings that I could turn down. That way, I could have a little bit of a smoother gaming experience. I don't want to be playing at 30 FPS. It was a bit, how should I say this? It was a bit, it just wasn't as good quality as 60 FPS. But of course, it would occasionally drop to 12. The gaming experience overall was pretty nice, so I'm very pleased with the way this machine performs. I think the most limiting factor is probably the hard drive when booting up the games, or the CPU when bottlenecking the usage of the GPU. Now, of course, you're not going to get the same performance maybe as this machine, because I got very lucky in some of the parts, but now I'm going to show you how you can actually do this yourself. So I went on a service called nextdoor.com, and it's basically a communication service for all your neighbors. And once you sign up, you can ask people, hey, do you have old unused PCs? And if so, I can take them and I will use them for something. You can also ask for specific parts, so you can ask for like a Wi-Fi card. Someone gave me a free wireless Wi-Fi card. Someone actually gave me this graphics card when I asked if anyone had an extra graphics card. So as you can see, there are a lot of really decent or pretty good parts as well that you can hopefully get out of your neighbors. So pretty much all you have to do is you have to sign up for their service, and then you can go and you can ask people, hey, do you have free PCs? If they're old, unused, etc., you can go and pick them up, bring them home, disassemble them, and then make something out of what you want. So some things that are definitely helpful when going through this process. Number one is making sure you know which parts are best. So like if you're going to compare processors or graphics cards, make sure you go somewhere and you know what you are dealing with. You can go to user benchmark, you can do a Google search, and you can quickly compare two components. I'd also recommend using PCPartPicker.com. Link will also be in the description. I love this because it allows you to make builds and check their compatibility. So if you have a build, you can take out all the parts, identify them, and then put them into the system. I'll link that down below. That's also very easy to keep track of what parts you have, because a lot of the time you're going to be dealing with a lot of parts. I have like 4 motherboards laying around here right now, and a bunch of cases and fans and whatever, but it's a really simple way to keep track of all your parts and all of your builds. And then at the very end, of course, you can take all those parts and then select which ones you want and then build from there. Alright, tip number 2 is to check the integrity of PSUs. So obviously you want to compare, you want like 80 plus or 80 plus bronze or gold, platinum, titanium, whatever, but you want to test whether or not the PSU actually works, because a lot of the time you can plug it into the motherboard and it'll give you no response. So you want to test that the PSU is actually working. You can do this pretty easily by taking a paper clip, unfolding it, and jumping the green cable and then a black cable next to it. Plug in the PSU, turn it on, and if the fan turns on, then you are set and good to go. Now that doesn't mean that you're not going to have problems. So the PSU can still be faulty and not apply power to some areas, so you do want to test that it is actually working. Alright, tip number 3 is to actually test the system before you take it out, because if you take out a lot of the parts, you're not going to know, where does everything go. So like on my first build, I got a bit confused because I didn't know where the front panel headers went, and that kind of tripped me up, and I didn't know where to connect cables. So make sure you know that the PC is actually in working condition before you take all the parts out. Okay, tip number 5 is to make sure that you do not get frustrated during this process, because if these computers are old, which this one happens to be, then you might not have working parts. This is maybe like 10 years old, 12 years old, so you could not expect everything to be in working condition. If something does not work or something does not boot, first check that everything is plugged in. Make sure the CPU, the little CPU ATX V12 is actually plugged in, or ATX 12 volt. Make sure the motherboard thing is plugged in. Make sure all the front panel headers are plugged in. Make sure the SATA cable is plugged in, etc. So you want to make sure that everything is actually plugged in first. Alright, and then my final and last tip is to keep track of all your parts and your screws, especially your screws, because you're going to need screws for a lot of the builds, especially if you're building multiple, and you need to keep them in a place where you can find them. My mistake was that I would just undo everything and just put it right below where I was making or taking out stuff. So eventually I had to go and I had to search the entire room to find the screws that I needed, because I didn't have the screws on hand and I had just left them in one pile. And so eventually I just had like 5 different piles of screws. I had screws all over the place, I had parts all over the place, and sometimes it was a bit hard to find stuff. So just stay organized. That is a really crucial thing. Maybe like keep all of one component in one area, keep all of one component in another area, and so forth. Alright, so that's going to wrap up today's video. If you did enjoy, be sure to hit that thumbs up, subscribe for more content. This little keyboard right here and this magnificent mouse, these two are going to be reviewed in a couple of days, so make sure you stay tuned for that. It's a really awesome keyboard and mouse, and I love it a lot, and I will hopefully be posting that in the next couple of days. Again, thank you guys so much for watching. All links will be in the description. Links to Nextdoor, links to PCPartBreaker.com will be linked in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys thoroughly enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.